Welcome back to Series 4 of Beyond the Books with me, Beth Price. Beyond the Books is your behind-the-scenes look at the research going on in the School of Literatures, Languages and Cultures at the University of Edinburgh, otherwise known as LLC. Every week, I get to sit down with one of the researchers in LLC, everyone from fellow PhD students to senior lecturers, and I find out what they're researching and why they're researching that. This week, I am joined by Dr. Marie Legendre, senior lecturer in Islamic History. After earning her PhD from the University of Leiden and University Paris-Sorbonne, Marie worked at the University of Oxford and SOAS University of London before coming to the University of Edinburgh in 2018. She looks at late antique and early Islamic history, especially administrative and economic history, as well as women and gender, papyrology, and multilingualism. Hi, hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's a beautiful day today, and this is, I think, the office with the nicest view that I've been into.
It is. I'm very lucky. I have a lovely office. It's very nice to see the cracks from here and George Square, on a beautiful sunny day.
So, Marie, you're in Islamic and Middle Eastern studies.
Yes.
How did you get into Islamic and Middle Eastern studies?
It's an interesting story because where it started is that when I was a kid, there were some school books of my mother lying around in our house. And I remember quite vividly one day I was looking through one of those books and I saw something about the pharaohs, about ancient Egypt. And I remember looking at that and being like, this is what I want to do, which eventually I phrased as I want to become an archaeologist and work in Egypt.
Of course.
I have so many people who tell me, I thought the same when I was, 7 years old. But I never let go of that idea. So I started university in France, which is where I'm from, and I studied archaeology and history of art. And I also started to study a number of languages because I wanted to be, as I said, an archaeologist, and I wanted to work in Egypt with Egyptians. So the first languages I studied were first Arabic, to be able to speak to people in Egypt.
That makes sense.
And I also studied Coptic, which is the language of, it's usually perceived as the language of the Christians of Egypt. As a kid, of course, I played with a lot of things that had to do with hieroglyphs. And I did a few courses, hieroglyph courses, actually, as a kid. Long story short, I studied all the stages of this Egyptian language at university. And actually, I discovered Islamic studies and Islamic Egypt as an academic topic. It's not something that I had been, looking into before I joined university, but I remember the very first years I joined university, I took a class in Islamic archaeology with a great teacher, and I was completely hooked. And I do like that realization because it's really, the discovery of an academic topic. It's not just something I saw as a child. It's like, okay, entering university and being exposed to the study of Islam as an academic topic was very important for me. So I still did my undergrads and then my master's dissertation. I still wrote this on ancient Egypt, but I was very much hesitating at that point. I remember being like, oh, do I do my dissertation on ancient Egypt or do I do it in early Islamic studies? And at that point, I had also studied Greek. And when I finished my master's degree, I got a scholarship from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs to continue learning Arabic in Egypt, which was my dream. And when I got there, I got involved with the French Institute of Archaeology in Egypt. I became quite close to the director of studies, who eventually became one of my PhD supervisors. She became a great mentor. And she saw in me something I had actually never seen, is that I knew all the languages to study a very interesting body of documentation, which is now my specialty. And these documentations are documents written on papyrus from the early Islamic period, which at the time of the Islamic conquest of Egypt were written in 3 languages, Arabic, Coptic, and Greek. That was very much a turning point. And that was really when I started to specialize on the period I am working on now every day as a scholar.
In my mind, papyrus was almost exclusively like pharaohs, ancient Egypt, pyramids, hieroglyphs. Maybe it's naive. I hadn't thought of papyrus being used beyond that sort of classic horrible history style that was ancient Egypt.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I think a lot of people have this assumption. And I would say that, anyone who doesn't know, who's never really studied pre-modern history as an academic topic, associate papyri to ancient Egypt. Papyrology, the study of documents written on papyrus. which massively has been preserved in Egypt. What's interesting is that as an academic subfield, papyrology is mainly the study of Greek. If you go to the General Papyrology Conference, which is not something many people will go to, but I tend to do that, you will see mainly people who are specialists of Greek.
So then it sounds like you almost knew that you wanted to be an academic from quite a young age, but then you found your way to what you're specializing in, being an actual grown-up.
Yeah.
Do you still feel that same kind of childhood passion now when you're working on?
Absolutely, absolutely. Even if I don't go to Egypt as often as I used to, I actually go there every day. Like Egypt is always on my mind. And that's what I still link to that passion I have for that topic. I still absolutely have that passion. I still maintain my obsession with Egypt. And also what I do in my everyday job, when it's teaching or writing research or going to conferences or going to a collection to look at papyri, I still feel that same passion that I felt when I was looking at that book of my mother's.
Amazing, which leads quite nicely onto a bit about your current work and your research. But before I ask specifically about what you're looking at, I'm spectacularly ignorant about Islamic history. What does late antique and early Islamic history actually cover?
The study of late antiquity and early Islam has been a wonderful development, in my view, in the field of history since mostly the 90s. People have started being interested in that. So it starts as a simple question of historical chronology. I think most people are aware that you have the way that Western history as an academic discipline has divided time is prehistory, cavemen, etc., antiquity, Roman Empire, pharaohs, all of that, the medieval period, the modern period, and the contemporary period.
Yeah.
One question that was asked quite a lot in the 20th centuries was, does the rise of Islam change everything?
I see.
Does the development of Islam in the 7th century, with the teaching of the Prophet Muhammad, and the early Islamic conquest that is going to get rid entirely of the Iranian Empire of the Sasanians, they're going to rule Iran and Iraq and take a lot of the regions that were under the control of the late Roman Empire, Syria, Egypt, North Africa, etc., because there was the creation of a new religion, a new political power, and because the expansion of Islam was also reshifting the political map of that world entirely. Was that a big break? Did that mean that late antiquity came to an end and that now it was the medieval period? But it's kind of an old-fashioned question. Nowadays, the consensus in the field is that no, late antiquity does not end with the rise of Islam. So we kind of end up in a situation where late antiquity and early Islam actually overlap.
Okay.
And late antiquity does not come to an end with the rise of Islam for several reasons, because late antiquity is now understood as this period where you have a lot of key development with the history of monotheisms in general. It's not only about the development and spread of Christianity, it's also about the development of Islam. It's also about the development of rabbinic Judaism. So it's a period in which you have a lot of development linked to the history of monotheism. But that's not the only one. And I think the best way I've heard anyone talk about what the field of late antiquity is one colleague here in history who said when we were in the seminar with students, it's more of a state of mind than really talking about a chronology, because really what it is nowadays to work in the field of late antiquity, it's a field in which all colleagues agree that there is a lot of value in working in a pluridisciplinary manner, that you do not only work with manuscript or historical narrative, which is the traditional type of sources for historians, but that you need to use documents such as the papyri, you need to use the archaeology, you need to use the architecture, the history of art, the coins, anything that you can get your hands on is going to enrich the picture. So it's a very multidisciplinary field. And it's also a very multilingual field in the way that it uses not only the languages of the big empires, not only Arabic, not only Greek, not only Pahlavi, Middle Persian for the Persian empires, but also all the languages of the different sources, Coptic, as I mentioned earlier today, Syriac, Armenian, that it was a highly multilingual world, the world of the first millennium, and that if we want to reconstruct a comprehensible picture, or a picture that is as accurate as possible, we need to take into account all those voices, not only the voice of the dominant. So that's how it's a state of mind more than really a chronology, because then you actually end up with a lot of very funny discussion on when is the end of late antiquity. And it's not easy to train in, so many languages and so many subfields of history. But the question definitely applies to what I do as well. Am I a papyrologist, someone who sits down most of the day and try to read papyri, or am I a historian? The answer to that is I very much feel like a historian. But the work I do, my research work, my everyday research work, is very much the work of a papyrologist. So to me, it's more, again, can come back to this idea of state of mind, or maybe of methods. I think, history as a discipline is a set of historical methods. And you can be a historian when you are mainly preoccupied by those methods. But then there are many ways to do history as a researcher. And yeah, my choice is to do it the multidisciplinary way.
Which brings me to your current research. Administrative and fiscal history.
Yes.
2 questions. What is that? And how did you get to that through papyrology and this kind of broader curiosity?
Yeah, we're reaching a point where we're really getting some results on that. And it brings me back to those moments where I was looking at the materials and I was like, this doesn't make sense to me at all. And it's very nice to be able now today to say, well, I saw the problem. Eventually, I did find a solution to that.
That does sound really satisfying. And just before we talk a bit more about that project, which sounds really fascinating, but also sounds like it's a perfect example of that. Identify a space that you need an answer to, and then go and do the research to get that answer, which is kind of what we're supposed to do as academics. And yes, before we talk about that, I have another question about the kind of academic and fiscal history quite broadly. Another one of your research interests is gender and women. Do they overlap particularly, or are they quite distinct threads that you enjoy researching?
At the moment, there are distinct threads. The aim is really that they should overlap a lot more. But because those two threads are based on very different types of material, I haven't worked on women based on the papyri. The work I've done on women is based on the narrative sources, the very traditional type of sources that historians have traditionally worked on. And it's kind of funny because it's where this all started is that as often as an academic, I was asked the year I joined Edinburgh, actually, to review a book that someone else had written. And there was one thing I did find very puzzling in this book is that the book was talking about marriage strategies in the ruling family of the first Islamic dynasty, the Umayyads. And they named the mother of a caliph, one of the rulers of that dynasty, and they didn't name the right person. And it made me realize why is that? Why would you? Is that an information that is hard to find? The name of the mother of a caliph. There's a source which is behind you actually. All those green books. Mm-hmm. And one of the sources that historians of the early Islamic world use all the time is the history of Al-Tabari, that you have behind you. 40 volume in the translation, translated into English, very easily accessible, and you have that information in there. The name of the mother of that caliph. But it kind of made me realize something very basic about the state of the field is that, first, why would you make that mistake? Is it not important to get the name of the mother right? And actually made me realize that no one had ever written anything about the mothers of caliphs. So many textbooks and handbooks of early Islamic history had been written focusing on the men of that family who had ruled, but there was really nothing that had been written at that point about the mothers. And now we are 8 years later and the situation has changed, thankfully. But I was teaching a course on that dynasty at that point when I joined Edinburgh. And I basically asked the students to do it. I said to the students, one of your assessment is going to be find me the name of all the women, of all the mothers of the Umayyad caliphs. And they did. which was confirmation that, the students could do it. Surely colleagues could do it as well.
You'd hope. Because that's what the textbook should probably
Exactly.
do naturally.
Exactly. It's a story of men. And and I wanted to do things differently. Because, of course, one of the problems for that topic is that we rarely hear the actual voice of the women. We hear about them in sources that were written by men in a society where the role of women is mostly conveyed to us through the male gaze. And the sources, more than really telling us straightforwardly what women did and what women thought, they reflect the debates that men had about women. So a lot of the available literature actually conveyed that.
Yeah, it's
problematic.
Yeah.
We don't hear their voices.
Yeah.
They are only token of male power. And I don't mean that all of those things are wrong. A lot of that is very true, but that should not be a reason to not talk about those women.
But yeah, it's a real frustration of the sources that have survived and that we can access.
Yes. Yeah, no, that doesn't surprise me. And, to me, still, this is not a reason to write textbooks where you only have men. No. There should be a way, and there is a way to include those women in the way we write history. So that's how, coming back to my research, that's how those two trends in my research are separate at the moment. The research on women and gender is really about political history and history of ruling families. And everything else I've written about administration, taxation, is using the papyri and looking at what's happening on the ground in the villages, in the monasteries, in the smaller cities of the Egyptian valley, which does not mean that you don't hear about women in papyri. You really do. So it's more a future goal of mine to bring those threads together, which I definitely look forward to, but I'm not quite there yet.
But so we'll talk then about your current project, which is funded by the European Research Council. I would have pronounced it Caliphal Finances. Is it Caliphal?
No, Caliphal Finances.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Lovely. So this project started in 2021.
Yes.
And it runs until 2027. Is that right? So next year. I guess to start with, what's the elevator pitch for the project? What's the kind of abstract version of the main goal that you're looking at?
So the point of the project is to understand how the early Islamic Empire financed itself.
Okay.
So it's a project of economic history. When you have the development of the early Islamic Caliphate, this spectacular empire in terms of its geographical stretch, there's a simple question about how did that work in economic terms. And a lot of that can be answered by looking at the taxes that people paid.
Yeah,
of course, like with any political history.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
How did they fund this? They taxed the people.
They taxed the people, they collected tribute, and they also were interested in trade. So because of the wonderful documentation we get from Egypt, we have a lot of very detailed information about taxation and movements of goods and value by those early Islamic empires. The chronology of the project is especially focused on the Abbasid Caliphate, ruling from the middle of the 8th century, 750, until actually the 13th century. And traditionally, the history of that Abbasid Caliphate has been written by using the enormous wealth of sources that were written in Baghdad, their capital. And anything that has to do with taxes has been written with the point of view of the Caliphal center, the point of view of the ruling elite. Whereas in the project, we argue that if you want to understand the fiscal system and the economy of empire, you need to understand how things were working from the taxpayer to the caliph, not only by focusing on the court. So not only hearing the voice of the rulers, not only hearing the voice of their court, but again, coming back to that multidisciplinarity to try to hear as many sources as we can, and especially focusing on those very detailed information we get from Egypt, from the papyri. And you could actually rely on social networks, social and economic networks, and having people at your court that would provide a guarantee for the taxes of this or that province, and actually ask those people to give you the cash, better than asking someone to travel from Egypt to Iraq. Okay. So you would really rely on people who had trade networks or networks of ownership of land across provinces and could be doing that for you. So you didn't have to move the cash yourself. That was the best way of doing so.
It's very sensible when you think about it, isn't it?
It's, again, the working assumption of the field has been, oh, if you wanted to be rich, you had to move cash around from Egypt, from North Africa, from Central Asia, from Syria to Baghdad. But something you see a lot in the history of the pre-modern world, or even nowadays, is that rich people are not always cash rich.
Yes, it could be land, it could be other assets, but not necessarily transportable cash.
Exactly. And being asset rich is really what defines rich people in the history of the world. So we're really exploring this as well. Is that really moving assets and moving titles, acquiring titles to ownership of non-cash asset was also a way to collect provincial money.
That's really fascinating. So you've been working on this as a research team since 2021.
Yes.
What's the hope in 2027 when it comes to an end? Is it to use this as grounds for more research? Or is it to kind of go, great, we have an answer to this question that you've been trying to ask?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. At the moment, we already have answers to a lot of the question I had set out in the project. And it's more than, giving the definitive answer to a lot of questions. It's prompting the field to think differently about the particular problem. And that's how I like to think about the project. One of the main outputs is a handbook of early Islamic fiscal history that we're working on this year. We have a big conference coming up next month where we're going to workshop that volume. And it's going to be a set of studies that is exactly doing that, prompting the field to think differently about economy of empire and taxation within the wider field of early Islamic histories, to give tools to our colleagues who are not specialists of those questions to tackle fiscal topics when they come up in their research, or to teach about that when they choose to teach about economy or fiscal questions in their teaching. So I think, to me, it's more, that's really the takeaway of the project and the achievement of the project, to prompt the field to think differently. We're also editing a number of new papyri in Greek, Coptic, and Arabic, which is always necessary for the field to progress, to give access to new sources. So we're answering a lot of the questions we had set out for ourselves, but there's always so much more to do. I think, especially when you look at papyrology for Arabic and papyrology of the early Islamic period, it's a very new field, and there is enough work for several lifetimes. And recently I was doing that. I was writing this application to new funding. I was like, I don't want to be doing that. I just want to be sitting down and working on taxes. That's the thing. This is how academic careers work. So you have to do that.
And you started in 2021. When did you actually start devising the project? And how long was that process to get the funding from the European Research Council?
Yeah, so that brings me back to the PhD and to that chapter I had written for the PhD that I was very unhappy with, where I realized this is not the work of one person, this is the work of several people. It can't be solved just by me. There's just so much to do. And because I had done my PhD on an ERC project as well, on a project funded by the European Research Council, I had enjoyed, again, this group dynamic already when I was writing my PhD, because my supervisor had a funding like that. So I always thought, I would love to get that for myself. So I finished the PhD. And then, of course, I was on the job market. And then I got the job in Edinburgh, which was then the last year. 2019 was the last year I was eligible for the ERC. And then I applied. And then I got it.
Brilliant. And then was it just you putting that application in? That you did the whole pitch project? This is what it's going to be, and I need money for postdocs, PhDs, everything.
Yes. So that that's the academic part. You get a lot of support from the university in doing those things, and especially in LSE, we have someone absolutely wonderful who's Janet Black, who, without Janet, there would be no project. So it's as simple as that. And that's really crucial, to have this support. I didn't have to worry much about the budget. I just sat down with her and told her I want that many PhD, that many postdocs. And, she did the budget and that was it. And
Perfect.
yeah, and, it was also just more support because it's the little anecdote is that I started preparing. So I started in Edinburgh in September 2018 and the deadline was October 2019. In the spring, I started to talk about this with Janet and got support from other parts of the university in doing so. And I wrote the whole thing across the summer. And for the final stretch, the thing is, at that point, I was expecting a baby. And I was unable to work as much as usual, if you see what I mean. And there was this point where we were, I think, 1 week before the deadline. And I was like, that's it. I'm not going to make it. I remember I was sitting at that table, had a pile of things to mark for my course that recruits 100 students. I was sitting at that table trying to mark those things. And Janet came in, knocked on my door, and was like, so how's the ERC application going? I looked at her, I was like, Janet, I'm just absolutely exhausted. I have all this to mark. I'm not going to make it. And she's like, oh, it's such a shame. It's such a great project, It would be really great if you could manage to give it the final push. And, if she hadn't done that, if she hadn't crossed the square to come up here on the second floor, to knock on my door and to be like, come on, Marie, it's like, you need to do this. It's really, you can do it. There would be no project because I would have given up because it was the last year I was eligible. So, when I say no Janet, no project, I mean it.
So all credit to Janet.
Exactly.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I think that's something that is genuinely lovely about LLC is the support staff as much as the academic community.
100%.
Absolutely couldn't be the same department without them. This has been lovely, but I have reached the end of my questions. So the last question that I have for you is, do you have any closing advice for current students in LLC or people who are thinking about doing a PhD, whether that's here at Edinburgh or elsewhere?
I think, because we talked about passion, I think, in the end, those are the things that are important to me. But yeah, I don't know how I've maintained that passion, but it's definitely still there. And, that's always what I say to students who choose a dissertation topic, or if it's for the master or for the PhD, it should be something that you really care about. It should be something that you really feel passionate about. It should be something that matters to you. It doesn't matter if I think that's a relevant topic or what. I have ideas of topic, but it should be really something you deeply care about. Because if it becomes a career, it's going to end up being something you have to fight for. Something you have to spend every day of your career really working on and working. That's really, really hard work. And when you have to teach it, you have to find creative ways to make it appealing to make it appealing to others. It's not only about you. So that I would say that's very important. Specifically for the PhD, there's a similar advice I would give, which is find someone you really want to work with. Because I do feel like the relationship between the students and the supervisor is very important, and it's crucial for success down the line as well when you're going to be applying for jobs. If they are academic jobs or non-academic jobs, it's such an important relationship because a PhD is something really, really hard to do. And it's a lot easier if you have someone who's really in your corner. So to find a supervisor that you can really work with, and it's always with in any relationship in life, right? It's kind of it's a leap of faith because you rarely really know the supervisor before you actually start working with them, and it's the same for the supervisors about the student. But when that works well, that's very enjoyable for everyone involved. But yeah, that's what I would look for. It's just find the topic that you are really passionate about. Find people you really want to work with, and find your community, because that's really important support to have when you're doing things like that.
Thank you. We're out of time. I'm out of questions. Thank you so much for joining me and talking to me today. I found that really fascinating.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for having me. That was very nice.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Books, and thank you again to Marie Legendre for being my guest today. If you want to find out more about Marie's current research, you can visit the Caliphal Finances blog at blogs.ed.ac.uk/Caliphal Finances, and that's CALIPHAL. If this episode piqued your interest on the research that goes on here in LLC, you can listen to the rest of this series, as well as Series 3, also hosted by me, on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube. Search for at the University of Edinburgh LLC there. If you head to the university website, which is llc.ed.ac.uk/research/beyond-the-books, you can also find Series 1 and 2 hosted by Emma Avia and Alan Davis Walker. For now, it is goodbye from me. I have been Beth Price, and this has been Beyond the Books.